Hi guys, this is Vince back again with the Tinkerer's Workshop, and this is part 2 of the Atlas Universal Compound Vise. In part 1 I took the vise apart and talked a little bit about how it works. If you didn't see that video, you might want to go back and take a look at it. And in this part I will be reassembling the vise. I've got everything broken down into individual parts, and the paint on this vise was in really good shape, so I decided not to go to the trouble of stripping it down and repainting it. Instead, I just cleaned everything off in a solution of warm water and ammonia to get the grease, caked on grease, cleaned off. And everything's laid out here, ready for reassembly, so let's get started on that.
Alright, we're going to start by assembling the base. And I think I showed you in the first video how I had some issues with this feed screw. It would, when I turn it, it would just sort of, the whole thing would sort of back out. And I think I figured out what the problem is. There's a collar that fits in here, and this is held in place with, it's supposed to be held in place with a set screw, and that was missing. So what was happening is, as you turn the crank, the whole thing was just kind of backing out, and there was just a lot of back and forth play in here. So I picked up a set screw to replace the one that was missing. And like I said, this collar just slides into that hole. There's a witness mark on the top here that will be used in conjunction with the micrometer dial, so you want to make sure that's facing up. And then there's also a little hole here for adding oil to keep it lubricated, so again, that should be facing up to the top. So once that's slid in, just tighten up that set screw, and that's good to go. The feed screw has a little washer on it there, and then that just slides right through the collar. Next we'll put the micrometer dial on. This crank handle is held onto the shaft. It's trapped between a couple of nuts, so you want to thread one on and then snug it up against the micrometer dial, but you don't want it too tight because this needs to be able to turn to make adjustments. So you just want it barely touching there. And then before you put the crank handle on, you have to put the woodruff key in this slot. And these are usually pretty tight, so in order to get it seated, I usually will resort to using a small little machinist or milling vise to just kind of press that in. So I'm gonna grab a little vise and set that up. Okay, hopefully you can see this. I've got the woodruff key just loosely placed in the slot, and it's turned sideways. And then the whole thing is in between the jaws of a vise. And I'll put a little piece of wood packing here just to protect the threads of the screw. And I'm just going to use this vise as a press to press that woodruff key down into the slot so that it's fully seated. That should be good. So that way the woodruff key is seated completely, and the handle should slide right over that if we're lucky. Yeah, there we go. Last step then is to add the second nut, and you might have to play with the tension on the nuts a little bit. To adjust the nuts on the crank, usually what I do is I'll run the back one all the way up against the micrometer dial, and that takes out any play, but it also makes it so you can't turn this dial. So then you have to back it off just a tiny little bit, just enough so that the dial will turn, but there's not any play here. And then you can go ahead and tighten up the front nut. Sometimes it's helpful to have a second wrench that you can hold on that rear one while you're tightening this front one, but I'm just going to hold it in place there, and I think it should be okay. Yeah, it's still a little snug, so back that off a bit. Back that one off, and then tighten that down. That's good. So that turns. The micrometer dial will be tightened down with this set screw, but it should still turn freely, and there's no play in it there, so that's good. And now we'll go on to installing the upper slide. All right, this upper slide, or I think Atlas called it the carriage slide, it assembles pretty similar to the base. I've already got this sleeve collar installed. One thing you got to do before you install the feed screw is install the bronze nut, and that will travel with the feed screw that we installed on the base. So that gets installed in here and just held on with the screw through the top, and you have to do that before you put this feed screw in because you can't access the screw there. But before I put that in, I just wanted to show something that I discovered as I was taking this apart. There are two of these on this table for each of the two slides, and they're supposed to be identical, but this one must have been a replacement at some point, and it's a lot shorter. So I don't know if this got lost or worn out or what, but at some point somebody replaced it with a shorter one, which it works, but it probably doesn't offer quite as much support for that feed screw. So at some point I might make a new one that's longer to replace this short one, but I'm going to go ahead and use this one for now. This one goes on the top slide, but this is the one that goes here, so that just fits in there. And then, like I said, there's a screw that holds it in place through there. So I'm going to go ahead and install this and then put the feed screw in. The crank handle is pretty much just like the one on the base. Has the same micrometer dial and the woodruff key and double nutted system. So I'm not going to go ahead and show that again. I'll go ahead and do that off camera. All right, I've got the carriage slide assembled, feed screws in there, and that turns nicely. We're ready to go ahead and attach the carriage slide to the base, and those are connected with this dovetail, machine dovetail slot. And there's a steel gib that fits in here and allows you to tighten the fit, to adjust the fit so that it's take out any play, but it's still a smooth fit. I've got these gib screws backed all the way out, and I'll take that out for now. Before we put this together, I'm going to just put a little bit of whey oil in here, just so that this slides nicely. And I'll put a little bit of oil on the screw here as well. Getting these to fit together, sometimes you need 3 hands to do it, but let's see if we can do it. So I'm just holding this gib in place for now until I can get it slid over the end of this dovetail. There we go. And then you got to make sure that that bronze nut engages with the feed screw there. And we can just start backing that in. Okay, now all I need to do is tighten these gib screws down. They're tightened down with the screw, and then there's a nut to lock it in place. So again, that's kind of boring to watch on camera, so I'm going to go ahead and just do that off camera, and then we'll come back and do some more. Okay, I've got the compound rest swivel, got the nut installed on that and replaced the gib screws. This slides on the same way. I've got a steel gib that fits on there, so we'll go ahead and add a little whey oil here. And a little bit of oil to the screw. And let's go ahead and see if we can get this one to slide on. I know this is probably going to be remedial for most of you, but the way I adjust these Gibbs screws is to hold the nut in a wrench and then tighten the screw down until it makes contact. And then once it hits the gib, just back it off just a tiny little bit and hold the screwdriver in place while you then tighten the nut down. And you may have to do this a few times just to get the right amount of pressure on that screw. But the idea is you want a sliding fit, but one without any play. So you have to do that on all 4 of them. And it's a little bit of trial and error, but I'll get that done. And then we can go ahead and finish it up. All right, one last step before we add the table, and that's to just put this chip guard on here. And that's just held in place with this single screw. Just like that. It kind of wiggles around here, but all it does is prevent chips and debris from falling down onto that feed screw when you've got it all the way backed out. So with that on, we're ready to go ahead and add the table. There's really not much to the table. Remember we talked about these beveled tapered pins here. I guess they're beveled. So put a little oil on that. They go in these holes here. And then we can add the cap screw that you use to adjust them. Those just thread in there. All right, the only thing left to add at this point are the jaws for the vise, and there's two different jaws. One of them has a key milled in the bottom, and that fits into the T-slot of the table. It's held in place just with a T-nut and a cap screw. Not much to that. That just threads on and then just slides into this T-slot, if I can get it in there. Like that. And that keyway that's milled in this keeps this in line with the T-slots so that it's a reference surface so that you know that your piece is registered perpendicular or parallel with the T-slots. The other jaw mounts the same way with a T-nut. It just slides on. But this is a swivel jaw, and it allows you to clamp up tapered or odd-shaped workpieces. It also has a sliding jaw that fits in here and can be clamped down with these cap screws. So the idea is you would put your workpiece in between the jaws, move it up, tighten down this cap screw, and then you could tighten these to put pressure against the workpiece and hold it in place. So now that we've got this all assembled, let's take it over to the drill press and get it mounted and see how well it works.